Hello and welcome to the final module of the class. This is week 3, lesson 4, and it's all about shutter priority mode. So let's talk a little bit about shutter priority mode. If you go back to this chart where we talk about the quadrants, we're back here in the lower left quadrant, and that's where we have kind of a semi-manual mode. So remember, full manual is where you control everything on the camera. Aperture priority and shutter priority mode kind of take that, they give you the control without making you do all the work. It allows the camera to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And as I mentioned before, we spend a lot of money on these cameras, so why don't we let them do some of the work that was intended for them to do? Now, there's always going to be a time to use manual, for sure. But while you're learning, aperture priority and shutter priority are a great way to learn. So let's go ahead and on Canon, this is TV, and that stands for time value. Which doesn't make a lot of sense. Every other camera maker, I'm pretty sure, uses just an S for shutter priority mode. So you're either looking for TV on the dial or S on the dial. And what that does is so remember back to aperture priority mode, you set it on either AV or A. And when you turn the dial, you're turning the aperture. So now in this case, when you put it on TV or S for shutter priority mode, when you turn the dial, you're actually changing the shutter speed. So now you're controlling the shutter speed, your camera is controlling the aperture. And then if you're finding that something is too dark or too light, you can raise or lower your ISO, just like with aperture priority mode. So let's go ahead and talk about when you might use this. So just to be upfront and honest, I don't use shutter priority mode very much at all. I like to use either aperture priority mode or full manual, but I use aperture priority mode a lot. Shutter priority mode I use for very specific reasons, and I'll tell you why. For one thing, I really like to control the aperture. I don't want it fluctuating based on the light because I like a particular look to my photos. I like to shoot wide open. I like a very blurry background. I like a shallow depth of field. And so I want to control what aperture that I'm shooting at. That's why I like aperture priority mode. Shutter priority mode, though, is great for certain situations. So let's talk about what those situations might be. So if you know that you want to create motion blur, so if I go back to my opening slide here, you can see that I'm creating motion blur intentionally. We talked about this when we broke it down, but I wanted to show the feeling of a busy street of movement. So I put it in shutter priority mode, and then I dropped the shutter really low in order to create that movement. So it was intentional. So that's a time when I might use shutter priority mode. Now, another thing that you might use shutter priority mode is if you're going to do a long exposure. So if you're doing fireworks where you want the fireworks to paint and you want to keep that shutter open for a long time, or if you want to get flowing water like a waterfall, or you want to capture the sky, like if there's a lot of clouds in the sky and the clouds are moving, you can put your camera on a tripod and you can open up the shutter for a long time, close the aperture down, take the ISO way down, and you can get kind of a long exposure, and that's what gives the feeling of those clouds moving overhead. That's kind of fun to play with. And then another thing that we're really not going to talk about a lot, but you can use shutter priority when you're using a flash. So we've talked about, I hate pop-up flash, but there's some times that you just can't avoid it. Okay, so if you're on Halloween night, it's pitch black out, there's no lights from a street light or a candle or anything to light your subject, the only way that you're gonna light the subject is with your flash. But you don't want to wash out everything in the background, because what flash does is it flashes your subject, everything in the background goes black. So what you can do on shutter priority mode is you can slow your shutter way down, and what that does is it allows all the ambient light. When I say ambient light, it's light that's already either in the room or in the scene. So let's use the Halloween example. Ambient light in a Halloween example might be pumpkins glowing, jack-o'-lanterns, it could be, lights in the decorations, it could be candles. any sort of light that's in the scene, you want to keep that light to keep the ambiance, but you want to be able to use your flash to light your subject. So in that case, I might back up a little bit from my subject so they don't get too bright. I'm going to slow my shutter speed way down. I'm going to hold really still, and it's going to allow the ambient light in through the shutter, and it's going to allow the flash to get your subject. So that is a time when I would use shutter priority if you have to use your flash. That way you can give it kind of the best of both worlds. You can give it the light that's already in the scene, and you can actually see your subject, because sometimes the flash is just unavoidable. And those are really the only 3 instances where I use shutter priority. Otherwise, I truly use aperture priority a lot. And I just pay attention to my settings and raise and lower my ISO based on if it's too light or too dark, whether I need to make it more sensitive to light or less sensitive to light. And that's really all I have to say about shutter priority. So I want you to know how to use it, and I want you to know what situation to use it in, and your assignments are going to go over that and help you try it out for yourself. And there may be a reason or a time where you want to use shutter priority. It's really up to you, but just from my personal taste, I like to control the aperture because I like to control the look of my photo. So thank you so much for joining this class. I hope you'd enjoyed it. I hope you've learned a lot, and I hope that these assignments are really reinforcing what you're learning so that you can go out there and make your own pictures and remember everything that you've learned here. So let me know in the comments, and good luck, and let's stay in touch in the Facebook group. Thanks.